I am here to introduce our moderator for Know Your Rights, a guide to navigating the Baltimore City workforce and housing market. Allie Emerson is the Director of Alumni Counseling and Programs at University of Maryland, Francis King Carey School of Law. Allie counsels law students and alumni in all stages of their career development, facilitates career exploration, and networking programs, and organizes employer engagement and recruitment programs. She received her JD from the University of Wisconsin School of Law and her BA in political science from the University of California, Berkeley. Allie is a licensed Maryland attorney and is actively engaged in many civic organizations throughout Baltimore City, including the Baltimore City Wage Commission. And I would like to welcome Allie, as she is the moderator for this panel and as she introduces the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction, Andrea. I'm honored to be joined virtually by 4 expert panelists who are ready today to talk about workplace, wage, and housing rights and policies. Specifically, we're going to be talking about empowering low-wage, reentry, and immigrant workers. Abusive employer practices and stagnant minimum wages prevent many workers, even those able to find full-time employment, from earning a living wage and accessing affordable housing. Wage theft is rampant, and all too often, employers violate labor and employment laws through wage theft and misclassification. These violations disproportionately affect women, people of color, and immigrants. So with this topic set, I'm going to introduce our 4 expert panelists, and then we'll do a rights and policies discussion, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So my first panelist that I'm going to introduce today is my fellow Wage Commissioner, Mr. John Barber. John is the Senior Counsel Representative from the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council, Carpenters Local 197. John is a Baltimore native and a Polytechnic Institute graduate who, after joining the Carpenters Apprenticeship Program, has worked in all aspects of the construction industry for the past 23 years. He is an expert in project coordination, senior level project development, and senior management. His commitment to excellence and professionalism is well known, and he continually exceeds industry standards. John is also well respected for his integrity, his ingenuity, and his reliability, qualities that he brings to the workplace and to his work as a wage commissioner. Also a member of the Wage Commission, I'm pleased to introduce Karen York, CEO of the Job Opportunities Task Force, an independent statewide nonprofit organization that promotes policies and programs that help low-wage workers advance to high-wage jobs. The youngest CEO and first African-American female to lead the organization in its 24 years, Karen leads a team of passionate advocates, experts, and practitioners focused on eliminating educational and employment barriers and facilitating the successful entry or reentry of low-skilled, low-income workers into the labor market. Karen received her bachelor's in international studies from Washington College and is widely respected for proactive and strategic leadership in numerous state and local policy reform efforts. Kim Johnson is also with us from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. As a housing policy analyst, Kim handles the coalition's policy portfolios related to appropriations, reentry housing, evictions, and housing protections in the Violence Against Women Act. Kim brings a depth and breadth of experience related to affordable housing, equity and access, and has also worked with Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, the Senate Minority Health Commission, and the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Kim received her master's degree in public policy from George Washington University. And our final panelist is Tyra Robinson, an attorney with the Public Justice Center's Workplace Justice Project, an organization that promotes worker power, justice, and equity in the workplace through Know Your Rights education, litigation, and policy advocacy. Tyra earned a law degree from Case Western Reserve University School of Law and a bachelor's in communication from the University of Cincinnati. As a law student, Tyra was a Biskind Public Interest Fellow, a student attorney in the Criminal Justice Clinic, for which the Jack Cronquist Award was awarded, a volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and published in the National Black Law Students Association publication, The Legal Pad. An honoree of Who's Who in Black Cleveland, Tyra aspires to make the law more accessible and navigable for oppressed people. From that basis, Tyra will share knowledge of the law to empower workers to exercise their rights. So thank you so much, panelists, for being here. And I'm going to kick things off, turning to a wage commissioner first. So John, thank you for being here. As you've brought your firsthand construction industry experience and insight to the Wage Commission for the past 5 years, I'm hoping you can give us a quick overview of the Wage Commission and your role as a commissioner.
Okay, the commission is comprised of 5 persons of integrity and experience who are appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. The commission is responsible for the administration and proper operation of the minimum, living, and prevailing wage, as well as enforcement of the displaced worker protection law. We meet the first Thursday of every month from 3 to 5. My role as a commissioner is to make sure that the laws are being abided by. We hear cases on a monthly basis, from late payrolls to non-payment of overtime, misclassification of workers, and our goal is to make sure that we are advocating for the employees. We are also able to recommend legislation to the city council for laws that protect workers' rights. That's a brief overview.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, John. You mentioned a few terms that I would like to turn to Tyra for some definitions. Tyra, like the Wage Commission and the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights, the Workplace Justice Project tackles these issues through a combination of worker rights, education, litigation, and policy advocacy. Before we get into some definitions, can you give us a highlight reel of your work and your accomplishments in those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already said, I'm a member of the Workplace Justice Project, and we focus our litigation primarily on wage theft, which disproportionately affects Black, Latinx, and immigrant workers. Our clients often include home care workers and construction workers, and currently we're representing door-to-door canvassers alleging wage and race discrimination claims. For example, as a result of one of our lawsuits in HV True Life, we were representing a group of home care workers, which were primarily Black women working for $12 an hour. And we reached a settlement in that case of $340,000 in unpaid wages. So, you know, it's hard for some people to believe that employers are committing these egregious acts, but unfortunately, it happens very often and in large amounts.
Wow. We're going to stick with you for a little bit longer, Tyra, so thank you. If you could, we've said a few terms, so I heard both you and John actually mention wage theft and misclassification. Since you're our attorney panelist, I'm hoping you can tell us what wage theft and misclassification are, what that all encompasses, and who typically is targeted with those practices.
Yeah, absolutely. So wage theft occurs when an employer fails to pay an employee all of the wages that they're due. It encompasses acts that include when an employer fails to pay, for example, earned overtime, deducts money from a worker's paycheck and impermissible reasons, and fails to pay for hours traveled between work locations. So those are some examples of how it happens. It happens more often than one would think and in a variety of ways. Some of the individual impacts of this are that there's less money in the worker's pocket to pay their everyday expenses. And the community impact of this, as we've talked about a little bit already, Black, Latinx, women, immigrant workers are disproportionately affected by this. And that is a barrier for these communities to build wealth.
Thank you. And misclassification, is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, misclassification is another way that employers can perpetrate wage theft, and it means that an employer is incorrectly identifying a worker as an independent contractor, or in other words, they're in business for themselves. It's often an inaccurate classification, and it has tax implications, for example, for the worker and for the employer, and it's a way for the employer to skim the books and take away money from the worker's pocket to put in their own, which has implications day to day and year to year, and those build up.
Thank you. And thank you for helping set the stage here. And John, I'm going to turn back to you for a quick second, because I know Tyra just explained misclassification in one context, but as a wage commissioner, one thing you notice a lot with respect to the prevailing wage is misclassification. Can you touch on that really briefly? Sorry.
Sure. A lot of these contractors, in order to make extra money, like Tyra was just mentioning, they'll classify a lot of their workers as laborers, unskilled laborers, common laborers, when in reality, they're either carpenters or electricians, plumbers, and sometimes you're looking at a $10 to $20 difference in pay. So that's a big issue that we see every day.
Thank you. So Karen, now that we've talked a little bit about the Wage Commission and we've learned some new terms, specifically rights, you've done both. So you are a commissioner and you've tackled a lot of this as a wage commissioner, doing a lot of the things that John was talking about earlier. But your work at the Job Opportunities Task Force advances access to jobs by eliminating educational and employment barriers to the labor market. Can you quickly give us a highlight reel? I'm not sure you can fit it all that you've accomplished in a quick period, but if you can give us a highlight reel of the accomplishments you've had at the Job Opportunities Task Force and some of the issues that you're repeatedly seeing in both capacities.
Sure. Thank you so much, Allie. I have to start off by, giving a little jab to my fellow Wage Commission member. I didn't know he was a graduate of Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. I'm a graduate of the great Baltimore City College High School. So for Baltimoreans, you know how that goes. So John, City forever. So for JOTF, the Job Opportunities Task Force, our mission is to help low-wage workers advance to high-wage jobs. And so when you hear that, when you hear our title, you think that, we are a task force and we focus solely on direct services and, skill development and the like. And we do a lot of that, but we're actually an advocacy organization. And we define ourselves as an advocacy organization, and we use a three-pronged approach to advance our mission because we recognize that programs can't fix everything. A report can't fix everything. At some point, you actually have to change a law, or you have to put a law on the books to ensure that fairness and equity and the like is actually something that is a thing and is accessible. And so, our three-pronged approach that I mentioned, we have program development, we have public policy advocacy, and then research and public education, where each kind of flows in and throughout each other. And so, over the years, our policy initiatives and our policy work focuses largely on the state level. We're a statewide organization, but our base is in Baltimore City. Our focus is state legislation because Baltimore is in a unique position in that, in many other states and localities and the like, they can handle many of their issues at the local level. Baltimore City, actually, many times you have to go to Annapolis to move on a number of these issues that are specific to what's happening in our Baltimore communities. And so the issues that we've worked on over the years really have ranged to those issues that either facilitate a low-wage worker being able to advance to high-wage jobs, whether it's educational credentialing or higher job wages through, skill training and the like, or those policy initiatives that seek to eliminate those barriers to someone being able to secure and maintain employment. And so the range, goes from, leading efforts and being a key member of advancing Maryland's, 2008 Flexible Leave Act, right? That would, redefine and allow for workers to be able to take time, if a family member got sick, even expanding like 10 years later, we see our lead in partnership with Tyra and the Public Justice Center and a number of other folks around the state, around the Maryland Healthy Working Families Act, paid sick days, right? Allowing individuals to be able to earn time to take care of themselves and their family, right? You should not have to jeopardize a paycheck, or your job. I mean, God forbid you get sick. And so, it ranges from things like eliminating credit checks and hiring, right? Ensuring that employers are not using the fact that you have bad credit as a way to deny you employment, right? It's like, I actually need that in order to improve my credit. It includes things like ban the box, right? This idea that individuals have to check a box on not just job applications, but college applications, right? So we ban the box at both the local level, the state level for job applications, but also in college applications, understanding that not just for four-year degrees, but training providers and community colleges and the like, how important that is to workforce. Expanding access to criminal record expungement and shielding, knowing that Maryland is unique in that we have this thing called Maryland Judiciary Case Search, an online database that can be used to access anyone's criminal background information. And the record is no longer being used for sentencing and charging decisions. It's the sole determinant in housing, employment, and a whole host of other issues. And so how do we restrict public access to the record in a way that doesn't jeopardize these opportunities? Child support reform. And then, of course, of late, our focus on decriminalizing poverty and race. This idea that, you know, if you look at our communities, if you look at our jail and prison system, the majority of people that are sitting at our central booking are poor Black folks that are having to interact with the criminal justice system simply because they cannot meet the financial demands of the law. And that is a workforce issue. And so, you know, that's a reel that includes some highlights and a whole bunch of other stuff.
That was excellent. And you, along with our other panelists, you are so busy and active, and it's really impressive. So thank you. And thank you for being here. So I want to bring in our other advocacy expert here. And we heard from Karen on the state and local level, but certainly a lot of different issues. So Kim, turning our attention your way, we've heard about barriers to job opportunities, issues on job sites, wage theft and misclassification, and who's most vulnerable, most targeted, and most harmed by these practices. And actually, we heard Tyra say that less money in the worker's pocket means less to pay for living expenses, like housing. So we know that all this is closely connected to housing. And actually, from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, we know that 40% of extremely low income renter households in Maryland are actually members of the labor force. What do you think this says about the intersection of wages and housing and affordable housing here in Maryland?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and for having me on today. It's a real honor to be here with all of these advocates. So I think what that says is kind of in some ways self-explanatory, right? Wages have not increased at the same rate as housing costs. Between 1979 and 2018, real hourly wages grew 1.6% for the lowest wage workers, but the real median gross rent increased by approximately 37%. And so how does somebody afford decent housing when their wages simply can't keep up with that expense? NLIHC produces a report every year called Out of Reach that estimates the housing wage, which we define as the hourly wage a full-time worker would have to earn to afford a rental home at fair market rent without spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And in 2020, the national housing wage is $23.96 an hour for a 2-bedroom apartment and $19.56 an hour for a 1-bedroom apartment. Maryland actually has the 8th highest housing wage in the country. So a worker would have to earn $28.06 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And at Maryland's current minimum wage, a worker would have to work 102 hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And there is no state, metropolitan area, or county in the US, none, in which a worker earning the federal or prevailing state or local minimum wage can afford a modest 2-bedroom rental home at the market rent by working the standard 40-hour work week. And only in 5% of all US counties can a full-time minimum wage worker afford a 1-bedroom rental apartment at fair market rent, 5%. And the massive layoffs and furloughs that have occurred because of COVID-19 and that have disproportionately impacted Black, Latinx, and Native people have only made that chasm between wages and housing costs worse.
My goodness. Thank you for that research and those facts. It's pretty shocking and upsetting. And that's why we are all here to talk about how to protect our workers on their rights, because we know that that affects their housing and the housing affects the workers. So I guess I'm going to ask for a few more definitions from Kim, if you don't mind. One thing that we've heard about is being cost burdened, severely cost burdened. And how does that relate in addition to the housing burden? Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, of course. So there's a prevailing standard that says households shouldn't spend more than 30% of their income on rent in order to afford all the other necessities and have money to save and to spend on, little niceties that all people should be able to enjoy. So if a household spends more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities alone, they're considered housing cost burdened. And a household spending over 50% of their income every month on rent and utilities alone is considered severely housing cost burdened. So households who are severely housing cost burdened have less money to spend on other necessities like adequate and nutritious food or medical care, let alone having money to save or to spend on those on all those little niceties that people should be able to enjoy. And spending so much on rent can make it exceedingly difficult to save money. The severely housing cost burden renters can often be one broken down car or unexpected medical bill away from missing a rent payment, facing eviction, and struggling with housing instability and possibly even homelessness. We know that when a family is evicted, that eviction will follow them as they try to find new housing and make that search for housing much more difficult. And evicted families often move into lower quality housing, end up living doubled up or with family or friends, or face the challenges of homelessness.
My goodness. Well, thank you for that definition. You guys are doing so well at explaining terms to us that we hear a lot, and then talking about how that affects certain people disproportionately. So I really appreciate that in this conversation. Turning back over to John and your work as a wage commissioner, or actually both, your work on the site, on the job site, and as a wage commissioner. What are some of the top things that you wish your colleagues knew about their wage rights while working here in Baltimore City?
Allie, honestly, the basic things, the bare minimal things, I wish they knew, like they have rights. A lot of these workers, they don't know the wage commission exists. They don't know how to file complaints. There's so many things that they're lacking. There's a lot of construction workers, they don't know our agency exists, how to file complaints. They're worried about their status. If, they're not here legally, what's going to happen if they file a complaint? And there's a lot of educational classes that we could be putting on as a city, just a bare minimum. I mean, like the overtime after 8 on the city projects, hardly anybody knows that.
Say that one more time. It's overtime. When is it?
After 8 hours on the city projects, whereas the state, it's different rules. But the average person, they don't realize that they have any rights at all. It's amazing. They'll do anything their boss tells them, whether it's safe, unsafe. It's crazy. We need to educate the workforce. And I'm out with our organization on a weekly basis trying to educate people. We have people that pass out flyers on a prevailing wage job just to let the workers know what the wage scales are supposed to be. But safety issues are a big thing too.
Thank you. And we know that the members of the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights is also out on doing job site investigations and inspections as well. And Tyra, does this all sound like things that you wish you knew, that more of our Baltimore City workers knew, or there are other specific rights that you think you come across repeatedly that you wish people just knew they could enforce?
Yeah, definitely. John said some on point things, and specifically, during the pandemic, I think that it's important for workers to know about their right to organize. Granted, a lot of these rights are not as adamantly protected or enforced, depending on the administration that is in charge. However, that baseline right does exist. You have a right to organize, you have a right to form and join a union, and you have protections for complaining collectively. And that's protected concerted activity under the National Labor Relations Act. So as we're seeing organization happening across the country, I think it's important for folks to know that you do have that right and you can pursue that. And there are some organizations in Baltimore that do that, such as the Baltimore Black Workers Center, Casa de Maryland. These are all organizations that workers should reach out to if they're not really sure where to start.
Excellent. And thank you for providing that list of organizations employers can reach out to in addition to your own organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Karen, since you deal on all sides of this as a commissioner, and then specifically the access to opportunities, what are some of the issues that you see repeatedly that you wish that more Baltimore residents knew they could do, or programs they could access to improve their job opportunity access?
Mm-hmm. So, of course, I have to piggyback off of, what both Tyra and John indicated around just knowing your rights. This issue I don't think is specific to workforce or to housing. I think when we are talking about low-income people of color, We talk a lot about access to things. There's also this idea of access to information and the information that we, like to make available to them. And so, that information is critically important. Speaking, wearing my wage commission hat, first, some of the things that I wish were more readily available that we see a lot of times in our work. And then, of course, seeing in other spaces, whether it's through our training program and the like, or how can we really, start to identify opportunities for and increase the number of local minority subcontracting opportunities here in the city. And even taking it a step further, how can we ensure that minority contractors have an opportunity to compete with some of these other primes so that their only option many times is not to be the subcontractor? That leads into another point of, in talking about policies, whether it's at the local or state level, but especially at the local level, stronger enforcement or clear clarification around language when it comes to how to hold primes accountable and who's really at fault. So that the buck is not passed to someone who either lacks information, who is just being on this contract is a way for them to get their foot in the door. And so, this could very well jeopardize any other opportunities that they have. And they were just unaware, or they were adopting a practice that, the prime was totally okay with and they thought could kind of trickle down. I think, another thing that could be helpful to the workforce as a whole, but also the Wage Commission, the Office of Civil Rights, their, community relations group and the like, is better alignment with legislative happenings, at City Hall, state government, MOED, our local, workforce agencies, but also with a number of other nonprofits and partners that are advocating on behalf of policy initiatives that could very well be in line with what entities and groups like the Wage Commission are trying to do on behalf of the local workforce.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I love both sides that you're giving, the Wage Commission experience and Job Opportunities Task Force. It's excellent. Kim, I do want to bring it back to you because we have heard about disproportionate impact on communities of color, persons of color in respect to worker wages and that the vulnerabilities and all of that. Can you tell us about housing discrimination and how that fits in, and particularly why Black and Latinx people are disproportionately included as discriminated renters or in housing discrimination issues?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think that it helps to understand how we got to this current moment by looking at history, because that context really, for me, was very illuminating in understanding why neighborhoods look the way in which they do, because it's all very much a purposeful, conscious construction. So in the 1930s, the federal government, through the Fair Housing Administration, began providing low interest rate mortgages to prospective homeowners. And they created color-coded maps to reflect the level of risk associated with issuing a loan in a particular neighborhood. And assessment of risk was tied directly to the racial composition of that neighborhood. White neighborhoods were considered low risk and designated green, and Black or integrated neighborhoods were labeled high risk and designated red. And this process is known as redlining. And with it, the Federal Housing Administration locked Black households out of using federal assistance to purchase or improve the conditions of their homes. Banks and subsequent federal, state, and local policies followed the FHA's lead. Local speculators and real estate agents also engaged in the practice of block busting, which is where speculators bought properties in white neighborhoods, rented them to Black families at above market prices, and then persuaded white homeowners in the area to sell their home because their now integrated neighborhood would soon cause property values to fall. So this practice helped facilitate white flight, which is the large-scale movement of white people from the cities and into the more segregated suburbs. And when construction of the interstate highway system began in the late 30s, Black and Latino neighborhoods were labeled as blight, demolished, and as a result, residents were displaced, local economies were destroyed, and inner city residents were exposed to increased pollution. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibits discrimination in housing on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. But the Fair Housing Administration has never really been given an adequate means of enforcing the act. And so it's gone by and large unenforced for decades and generations. So while housing discrimination on the basis of race is technically illegal, federal, state, and local policies and practices have created a system of de facto segregation in which money and resources are filtered into white neighborhoods, and Black and Latino families are concentrated in disinvested inner cities where people have access to jobs, less access to nutritious food and quality housing, and greater exposure to environmental pollution. So these policies are one of the roots of the dramatically segregated neighborhoods that we see today, and one of the reasons for the gaping disparities in health that have made coronavirus so deadly to Black, Latinx, and Native people. And so we see that continued discrimination today. I think I read a report yesterday that said Black households were appraised at a value 23% less than white households for the same house. And so these practices are ongoing. And I believe it was Karen who said earlier, if we do not have the means of enforcing anti-discrimination, these practices will continue to affect families.
And thank you for that overview, upsetting as it was. But we appreciate the historical context and where it is today.
I'm good at bringing upsetting news.
Yeah. So we do have some audience questions. So panelists, jump in with wherever you think you want to tackle it. So first of all, now I think this one might be really up your lane, John. What advice can you give to apprentices or construction workers who are new to the industry so that they are less likely to experience wage theft from contractors? And what will you tell them to do, not to do, when it pertains to getting paid properly and efficiently?
Well, wage theft, giving advice on that is just, if you guys agree to a certain amount of money, make sure you're getting that money at the end of the week. Make sure you don't have to give kickbacks. I mean, there's been some instances on some of these prevailing wage jobs where in order for you to stay on this project, every week you need to kick back the foreman some money. So that's some of the practices. If something like that is going on, it should throw up a red flag. A lot of people are scared to make complaints, but the thing is, you can do it anonymously. Ultimately, if it goes to litigation or something, their name's going to come out. But by that time, the job's pretty much over. So I would advise them to keep copies of their paychecks, because as you guys know, when some people come to the wage commission, they say, well, I was supposed to get paid this and I didn't get it. And they have no proof. We threw our stubs away. And I was always taught when I joined the trade, make sure you save every paycheck you got for whatever reason. So I have a file at home with paychecks from like 15 years ago. That I need them now, but I still have them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And Karen, you might have something to add on to this, because it does touch on access to new opportunities, and particularly when you're just starting out a career or you're new to the career, there's some lessons that you have to learn, and it can be a tough spot. Any thoughts on things from your perspective that a new apprentice or new worker new to the industry should know to protect themselves?
I mean, John, said it beautifully. I think, the only thing that I would add is, and I guess it's more so on, many of the nonprofits and training providers that work in this space. It kind of goes back to knowing your rights. We have to recognize that many times individuals who are placed in entry-level labor positions, or just entry-level positions, just generally. And these are individuals that have gone through a program, which means that this is probably their first real like job opportunity to be set onto a career. Many times that first paycheck, or even your first week on the job and everything that comes with signing all of those documents, will send you into, almost a bit of a paralysis. You don't feel comfortable necessarily, asking your employer, right? Not even like asking your employer whether or not this math adds up, but I don't even understand what I'm reading and looking at. And so, what can we do to make sure that, one, we are making sure that folks feel comfortable and are aware of their rights, but also, to John's point, understands that there are resources and tools out there that if you don't feel strong on what you believe are your rights, that there are ways that you can secure information that's anonymous, that won't feel that it'll drag on and you're just a number. But that's something that, we throw out know your rights a lot. And, just thinking, a bit more about what that looks like. I mean, again, we run a training program and, we find all the time that a big piece of our retention support is, if you are not there with them when they secure that job, like at least, 6 months to a year out, and you just leave them, that's a disruption in and of itself. And so how to make sure that you are constantly equipping them with information and tools to feel comfortable and confident in their agency.
And that's really interesting. Really interesting and helpful insight. So I really appreciate both of you on that. A few more questions from our audience. So we'll try to get through these in the time we have left. So the next question I got was, why isn't it the norm across the country to match wages with the cost of living in the area someone works in? What can be done about this? And great question. So anyone who wants to take that one on, I think it's excellent and touches on a lot of what was said.
I think that, the easy answer to that is it would not ensure much of a profit for certain folks. I think another easy answer is no one really cares about poor people, right? Like this idea that we got to help you no, it's this whole bootstraps, idea. Remember the famous, Martin Luther King quote, right? It's a cruel jest to tell a bootless man, that he must pull himself up by his bootstraps, right? And, expand that to include a bunch of pronouns, okay? And so, I think conceptually, philosophically, we've been toying around with this idea, like, why aren't we, why doesn't this make sense? And I think we just need to recognize that the very essence, and this is, I guess, like a whole other, like webinar conversation, but the very essence of American capitalism doesn't really allow for that, right? What is capitalism, right? It requires exploitation of labor, right? Coupled with, ownership, and, private, all of that, right? In the hands of a few, not everyone. So, we love to say all lives matter, but not over here. So,
Well, thank you for answering that one, Karen. It looks like the other panelists agree with that assessment. And all the organizations that are represented here are trying to do something about that topic. So, make sure you're looking into these organizations, National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Public Justice Center, and then of course, Job Opportunity Task Force and the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights. A few more questions, so bear with me here. All right, now, Kim, this one might be for you, but for everyone as well. What is Baltimore City doing to ensure housing discrimination doesn't happen again, taking the form of gentrification?
Ooh, that is a great question. I'm unfortunately not super familiar with specific local policies that are going on because we work from a national level. So I'm not sure if one of my esteemed panelists would have a better answer for that.
Well, maybe you could define gentrification in this context, just to, because you're the housing expert, so that would be helpful.
Sure. So gentrification is basically when, I'm trying to think of the best way in which to explain it, but basically higher income, often white people move into areas that have historically been disinvested and begin to kind of displace residents who have been there often for generations, driving up housing costs and forcing the people who have been there, often Black people, into even lower income neighborhoods because they can no longer afford to live in the neighborhood in which their families have lived for generations. And so that is kind of like a very broad, kind of like basic definition of gentrification. And unfortunately, we see gentrification happening not only in Baltimore City, but in major cities around the country, and resulting in the displacement of local populations who can no longer afford to live in their neighborhoods.
Allie, if I could piggyback on Kim's point, and I don't know, if Tyra, through, your work at PJC, have any thoughts on, the amplification of gentrification, particularly within the context of these things that we, call opportunity zones and the like. But, one of the things that I wanted to add to the definition of gentrification, because ideally, Kim, you did a great job. And you said the key word, which is critically important: displacement, right? Because that's literally what it is. And it's displacement of natives, and usually lower income natives. While optically, historically, and even currently, yes, there is a particular racial dynamic to gentrification, given the fact that there are certain racial groups that are more economically inclined and able to be mobile, right? But I think we can't ignore the fact that gentrification has both a racial and a socioeconomic angle, because you also find a dynamic of, you could have, a community that, identifies, as Latinx. You could have, a predominantly Black community, and there's a certain income level, right? All of a sudden, those residents are displaced with folks who are not of a different race, but of a different socioeconomic status. That is also a form of gentrification. And I know a lot of times it can feel like, no, that's not gentrification. But remember, gentrification is displacing lower income residents for more better off residents.
Yeah, thank you for that really important distinction. And I saw Tyra unmute, so I'll let you share.
Thanks, Kim. I just wanted to add, I agree with both the general definition and the more specified definition that Karen provided in that background. I just wanted to add that I'm not aware of any local or state legislation focusing on, for instance, rent control, which would help control the rampant gentrification happening in Baltimore and all over the nation. The only semblance of control that I've seen proposed is the Baltimore City Renter Relief Act, which has been enacted, and it prohibits landlords from raising rent during the state of emergency and within 90 days after the emergency is lifted, which is a good step, specifically during the pandemic. But there has to be more focus on rent control in order for gentrification to be addressed, and not just rent control, but understanding that you can't just displace communities, because where are they going to go? So it's really important that that's something that I think that legislation should be increasing, hopefully in Baltimore and in Maryland and nationwide.
And there's also the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund that is supposed to be, I don't want to quote it too much because I've been in and out, like monitoring it. But that is supposed to be a tool to address kind of the vestiges in what we're seeing of gentrification, and really focus on, access to affordable housing. And I believe it has also a local hiring component to it. So it's not perfect, but it's supposed to be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of all of that real quick too, I know that Maryland, the state of Maryland and Baltimore City specifically both have source of income discrimination laws on the books, which are very, very helpful because often if a family is able to obtain a housing choice voucher, it is very, very difficult for them to actually use it in private market housing because the private market can often say, oh no, we don't want to accept you because you are coming to us with a voucher. So source of income discrimination ensures that people cannot be turned away because of where their income is coming from, as long as it's legally obtained. It's also fundamentally important, I think, to while housing choice vouchers are great and a very, very underfunded program, only about 1 in 4 people who are eligible for housing vouchers are actually able to receive it. It's also very, very important to actually invest in those in the communities, and not through gentrification means through like opportunity zones, but investing in the communities that are there. People should be able to thrive in the communities in which they live.
And the last thing I promise that I'm going to say, if we're going to talk about source of income to ensure discrimination isn't a thing, then that also has to extend to eliminating discrimination for prospective tenants who have criminal backgrounds.
Yes.
Housing is a workforce issue. Okay. So if you, many times on the job application, they're going to ask your address. Like, you know, if you are currently incarcerated and you don't have a place to, you know, receive mail, they are going to keep you locked up until you have a stable home. And so I just had to add that, Allie. Sorry.
Oh, I love it. You guys are doing great with the conversation and answering these really good questions that we're getting. And we do have 2 more, so we're going a little bit over. So thank you, panelists, for bearing with me. 2 more questions. So are there any specific programs in Baltimore City for individuals with criminal infractions and seeking a career in any of the trades?
Actually, all of the construction trades are welcome to come. We don't do background checks, so any of the apprenticeship programs, your criminal history doesn't matter. The only circumstances or times that it may matter is, you know, not getting into the organization, but some of the jobs that you can be sent to, whether they're, you know, federal, you know, like Fort Meade or Aberdeen, where they do the background checks there and they exclude certain individuals for whatever reasons. But the trades, they welcome anyone.
Yeah. John is right. You know, the construction industry, you know, that's one of the industries that tends to be a bit more lenient to individuals with a criminal background, unless, as he indicated, it's on certain job sites. And the reason why is they're focused on core competencies, right? Are you going to show up on time? Like, can you get to work? Like, you know, all of those things. But, you know, to piggyback on that, specific to how to put folks particularly and help to deal with those barriers. In addition to some of the public policy work that we do, we also run a pre-apprenticeship construction training program where we are targeting city residents who have interacted with the criminal justice system. And while yes, putting them on a track towards, you know, entry-level labor, skill development, the most, you know, really the meat of it, the most important piece is the barrier elimination, right? Because I mean, if you are someone who is struggling with housing challenges, you can't get a driver's license because it's like child support, or you forgot to turn your tags in years ago and now you owe $3,000 to MVA. And I mean, like all of these different barriers that tend to be complicated by, you know, prior you know, carceral interaction, that has to be teased out before you're on the job site. And so, you know, our program, Project Jumpstart, really focuses on that customized intensive case management, paying for driver's education, you know, ensuring that you're ready for work on day one, whether it's tools and shoes and the like, and then carrying that through. But John is right. This is like one of the industries where, you know, like, I mean, I don't want to throw out, you know, all types of offenses, but they're lenient. It's definitely one of the better ones.
Excellent.
I can say some of our best employees and workers that I've seen out in the field are returning citizens.
Yep. Yeah.
And we didn't mention it earlier. We mentioned about some workers being exploited and stuff, the immigrant workforce, you know, but returning citizens, those guys and women, they're exploited too, because they know that, you know, contractors know they can take advantage of them because some of them are on parole or whatever it may be, and they have to have a job. So that workforce is really, really scared to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for that robust answer. And Karen, what was the name of your program again? Just so we can make sure it's
Project Jumpstart.
Project Jumpstart. Excellent. All right. And one final question, and we've touched on this a little bit. Do any of you believe that due to COVID and with possible administration changes, that policymakers will start to reevaluate what living wage must look like for a person to sustain their basic needs, food, shelter, healthcare, education? Anyone want
to go first? I don't want to go first.
to?
I'll give a brief answer, and it ties to what Karen said earlier. People just don't care about poor people, and they don't care to enact policies that will elevate those types of people, so that they can increase their standard of living. I think that COVID is illuminating a lot of issues that have culminated into one. And for that reason, I think there's going to be greater attention on these issues, but I don't know if people in power are going to care enough to act on it. And that's why earlier I mentioned the right to organize. I think that it's going to take workers and people from all backgrounds banding together to speak up, in unison for these things to change. I think that they're going to have to force politicians to change. I don't think that, broadly is going to happen because all politicians are going to care to raise the living wage. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for going first, Tyra. No, because I really can piggyback off of what Tyra stated. What we're seeing right now, understandably, is the focus of policymakers, the focus of almost everyone is the presidential election. And there's this idea that, not this idea, I mean, I don't want to sound like partisan or anything, but the focus is on who we're going to who we're going to take out of the White House, who we're going to get in the White House, whichever side that you're on. And there are a number of, folks who are in the policy space, who are in the organizing space in particular, who understand that it's levels to this. And we have to be in it for the long run, because what's going to happen, and we know this is going to happen because we see it happen every presidential cycle, right? Or every gubernatorial cycle, is that there is a focus on the top person, and a lot of rhetoric comes with what will happen if we get behind this person, or if we push this person out. And then that act is done and things are still the same, because they're really, it's almost like all of the energy is, has been sapped up in that. But it's not just that the energy has been sapped up in that, it's that there really was no real intentionality around it, right? So even when we hear on the national level, when we talk about, essential workers and, even when we use terms like paid family leave, we can say that all the time. We can say that all we want. And then because we, for years was like, oh, we need paid sick days. And then it took 6 years to get paid sick days in Maryland. And it wasn't just the Republicans, we were fighting with Democrats too. And so, after the presidential election, even though there are a number of, progressive, younger, more excited, aggressive policymakers in the General Assembly that, are willing to do research and read and look at other trends and, do all of these things to really push the needle. As Tyra mentioned, if we're not willing to do that consistent organizing where it's like, yay, great, we did the presidential, but workers are still barely able to make ends meet. And, the national talking points does not boil down to whether or not we're doing anything about wage theft, or whether or not folks are housing burden, or whether or not folks are, locked up because they can't afford bail and now they lost their job because of that. And so, how do we make sure that we are crafting an agenda that's consistent and applies pressure to policymakers, but also provides that support and that cover so that they can think and act and speak boldly as we want them to.
Awesome. Well, we are right up at time. So I really want to thank all of our expert panelists for, in this very brief moment, giving me the benefit of your definitions and your insight, your actual know your rights pieces, your how to access information, and then your policy and your history lessons. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to our audience. Thank you so much to Andrea Williams, our supervisor at the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights. We really appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe, stay healthy.